At 73 years old, I thought I knew my daughter Melody better than anyone. Then I overheard her laughing with her friends at my own dinner table in Riverside, calling me just our ATM while planning another expensive vacation I'd be funding. I didn't say a word that night, just smiled and served dessert like the good mother I'd always been. But what I discovered over the next few weeks about where my money was really going and what Melody had been hiding from me for years would change everything between us forever. That conversation was just the beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The October wind howled through the maple trees outside my Victorian house on Elmwood Drive, sending golden leaves dancing across the front yard Edward had landscaped with such care 20 years ago. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the late afternoon light filter through the lace curtains my mother had sewn for me as a wedding gift in 1975. At 73, I still found comfort in these familiar rituals of homemaking, even though my arthritic hands protested when I kneaded bread dough or spent hours preparing elaborate meals. The dining room table gleamed under the crystal chandelier Edward had surprised me with for our 30th anniversary. Every piece of my grandmother's Limoges china was arranged with military precision, each hand-painted rose facing the same direction, each piece of sterling silver polished until it caught the light like tiny mirrors. The burgundy cloth napkins were folded into perfect triangles, and the centerpiece of autumn flowers from my own garden added just the right splash of color. Melody had called me 3 days ago with that particular tone in her voice, the one that meant she wanted something but was being extra sweet about asking. "Mom, you know how much my friends adore your cooking," she'd said, her voice musical with practiced charm. "I was wondering if maybe, possibly, you might consider having us all over for dinner this weekend. I've been telling them about your beef bourguignon for months, and they're absolutely dying to try it." Of course, I'd said yes immediately. I always said yes to Melody. Now, as I checked the bourguignon for the third time, adjusting the temperature and tasting the sauce that had been simmering for 4 hours, I felt that familiar flutter of nervous excitement. I wanted everything to be perfect for my daughter and her successful friends. These were accomplished people with sophisticated palates and high standards, the kind of people who vacationed in Europe and drove cars that cost more than I'd made in a year as a high school principal. The front door's distinctive creak echoed through the house, followed by the sound of expensive heels clicking on my hardwood floors. "Mom, we're here," Melody's voice rang out with theatrical enthusiasm. "Whatever you're cooking smells absolutely divine." I smoothed my apron, the one with tiny violets that Edward had bought me for Mother's Day 15 years ago, and walked to greet them. Melody stood in my foyer like a vision from a magazine, her honey blonde hair styled in those effortless-looking waves that I knew cost her $300 every month. She wore a cream cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, paired with tailored pants and boots that looked soft as butter. "Darling," she said, air-kissing both my cheeks in that affected European manner she had adopted after her divorce, "you look absolutely radiant. Doesn't she look wonderful, everyone?" Behind her stood her usual crowd of friends, each one more polished than the last. Vivian Pierce, the divorce attorney who spoke in clipped, expensive syllables and always seemed to be evaluating everything around her for its monetary worth. Brandon Whitmore, who worked in wealth management downtown and wore suits that fit him like they'd been painted on. Priscilla Hartwell, who owned the most exclusive art gallery in Riverside and adorned herself with jewelry that caught the light like tiny spotlights. There were 2 others I'd met briefly at Melody's Christmas party last year. Cassandra something, who worked in real estate, and Jordan, whose profession I could never quite pin down, but who always seemed to have money for designer clothes and exotic vacations. "Mrs. Blackwell," Vivian said, extending a manicured hand with nails painted the color of fresh blood. "Melody tells us you were a high school principal for 35 years. That must have been incredibly rewarding work, shaping young minds." I nodded, suddenly feeling underdressed in my simple navy dress and grandmother's pearl necklace. Vice principal, actually, but yes, I loved working with young people. I saw 3 generations of some families come through Riverside High. How marvelous, Priscilla murmured, her eyes already scanning my living room, no doubt appraising the antiques and artwork Edward and I had collected over the decades. They followed me into the dining room, their conversation flowing like expensive champagne, discussions of recent acquisitions, upcoming gallery openings, and weekend trips to Napa Valley. I served the bourguignon alongside roasted vegetables from my own garden, fresh bread from the French bakery on Main Street, and the bottle of Bordeaux that I'd splurged on at the wine shop, spending more than I'd typically budgeted for a week's worth of groceries. "This is absolutely exquisite, Mrs. Blackwell," Brandon said, savoring his first bite. "The sauce has such complex layers of flavor. You must give us the recipe." I felt a warm glow of pride. It was my mother-in-law's recipe, passed down from her grandmother in Lyon. The secret is browning the beef in small batches and using 3 different wines in the braising liquid.
"Mom's always been incredibly generous with her time and resources," Melody interjected, raising her glass of wine. "When I decided I wanted to open my boutique instead of continuing to teach elementary school, she didn't hesitate to help with the startup costs. She even took out a loan against her retirement savings to make sure I had everything I needed." "That's what mothers do," I said softly, though I noticed Brandon and Priscilla exchange a quick, meaningful glance across the table. As the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing into their sophisticated banter. They asked about my years in education, my travels with Edward before his death, and the challenges of raising Melody as a single mother after her father walked out when she was 14. For the first time in months, I felt useful, interesting, worth listening to. "Tell them about the time you convinced the school board to fund the new computer lab," Melody urged, refilling her wine glass for the 3rd time. "Mom can be incredibly persuasive when she sets her mind to something." I shared the story of how I'd spent 2 years building a coalition of parents, teachers, and local business owners to support technology education at Riverside High. It had been one of my proudest professional accomplishments, seeing students who'd never touched a computer before graduating with real technical skills. "How impressive," Cassandra said. "You clearly understand the value of strategic investment in the future." The conversation continued through dessert, Edward's mother's famous chocolate trifle that had taken me all afternoon to prepare. As I served the elaborate confection with its layers of chocolate custard, sherry-soaked ladyfingers, and fresh whipped cream, I felt genuinely happy for the first time since Edward's death 6 years ago. "I need to get the coffee started," I announced, beginning to clear the dessert plates. "I have a lovely Colombian blend that I think you'll enjoy." "Don't you dare clean up, Mom," Melody said, slightly slurring her words from wine. "You've done more than enough. We can manage coffee ourselves." I retreated to the kitchen, humming softly as I prepared the coffee service on my good silver tray, the one Edward had bought me for our 25th anniversary, insisting that I deserved to feel elegant every day, not just on special occasions. I could hear their conversation continuing in the dining room, voices slightly louder now with wine-induced relaxation. That's when I heard Melody's voice, carrying clearly through the swinging door. "The beautiful thing is, she never questions anything anymore," Melody was saying, her words slightly slurred but her meaning crystal clear. "I just tell her I need money for boutique inventory or equipment repairs or some emergency, and she writes the check immediately. She's basically just our ATM at this point." The silver coffee pot slipped from my hands, clattering against the granite countertop. I gripped the edge of the kitchen island, straining to hear more over the rushing sound in my ears. "Seriously?" That was Vivian's attorney voice, tinged with what sounded like professional interest. "How much are we talking about on a monthly basis?" "Oh, it varies depending on what I need," Melody laughed, that same musical sound that had charmed teachers and boyfriends and employers for decades. Last month was probably $18,000. I told her I needed new fall inventory for the boutique, plus my car needed major repairs, and there was that spa weekend in Scottsdale that I absolutely had to have after the stress of the divorce. My legs nearly buckled. $18,000. In 1 month. I gripped the counter harder, my knuckles white against the dark granite. "Melody, darling," Priscilla's voice carried a note of concern. "Isn't that rather substantial for someone living on a retirement income?" "Please, she's completely fine financially," Melody replied with casual dismissiveness. "The house has been paid off for years, she's got her principal's pension plus Dad's life insurance money, and honestly, what else is she going to spend it on? She barely leaves the house except for grocery shopping and church. At least this way, the money goes to someone young enough to actually enjoy it." "Plus," she continued, and I could hear the smile in her voice, "she's so lonely since Dad died that she's just grateful I still want to spend time with her. As long as I show up for dinner once a month and act like the devoted daughter, she'll keep the money flowing." The chorus of uncomfortable laughter that followed felt like a physical blow to my chest. I remained frozen in the kitchen, listening as they moved on to other topics. Someone's upcoming European river cruise, the merits of different investment strategies, gossip about mutual acquaintances. Their voices seemed to come from very far away, as if I were hearing them through water. When I finally trusted my hands to be steady enough, I picked up the silver coffee service and forced my feet to carry me back to the dining room. The faces around my grandmother's table looked the same as they had 20 minutes ago, but everything else had changed irrevocably.
"Here we are," I announced, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "Fresh Colombian coffee, and I found some of those little almond cookies you like, Melody." They all exclaimed appropriately over the coffee's aroma and the delicate cookies I'd spent 2 hours making that morning. Melody jumped up to hug me tightly, declaring me the most wonderful mother in the entire world and promising to have me over to her house soon for dinner. I smiled and served coffee in my best china cups, asking about cream and sugar preferences as if my entire understanding of my relationship with my daughter hadn't just been shattered. But everything had changed. In the span of a 10-minute conversation, Melody had revealed herself to be someone I didn't recognize. Someone who saw me not as a mother to be loved and respected, but as a resource to be managed and exploited. After they left, amid promises of reciprocal dinner invitations and expressions of gratitude for such a lovely evening, I sat in Edward's old leather chair in the study, staring at our wedding photo on the mantelpiece. We looked so young and hopeful in that black and white image, convinced that love and hard work could overcome any obstacle. I thought about all the checks I'd written over the past 2 years since Melody's divorce from that nice accountant, Marcus. The $12,000 for boutique renovations when she claimed the previous tenant had left the space in terrible condition. The $8,500 for inventory after she said a shipment had been damaged in transit and the supplier wouldn't replace it. The $15,000 for her car when she claimed Marcus had somehow sabotaged her credit during the divorce proceedings. And countless smaller amounts that added up to devastating totals. $2,200 for a dental emergency, $3,800 for boutique equipment repairs, $5,500 for what she'd called essential marketing expenses. Always something urgent, always something that couldn't wait, always something that would make the difference between success and failure for her struggling business. I'd never questioned any of it. Melody was rebuilding her life after a difficult divorce, pursuing her dream of owning her own boutique. As her mother, supporting her seemed not just natural but necessary. Edward would have done the same thing, I'd told myself. We'd raised her to be independent and ambitious. But sitting there in the lamplight, surrounded by 46 years of marriage memories and 35 years of accumulated teaching awards and thank you letters from grateful students and parents, Melody's words echoed relentlessly in my mind. She's basically just our ATM at this point. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Edward for 40 decades, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile the daughter I thought I knew with the woman who could speak so callously about manipulating my loneliness and grief. Every conversation we'd had over the past 2 years took on new meaning as I replayed them with this terrible new knowledge. How many times had she called just when I was feeling particularly isolated, suggesting we go shopping or out to lunch, activities that somehow always ended with me picking up expensive tabs? How many emergencies had been carefully timed to coincide with my pension deposits? How many of her expressions of love and gratitude had been calculated performances designed to keep the money flowing? The next morning brought crisp autumn air and devastating clarity. I dressed carefully in my navy wool suit, the one I'd worn for important school board meetings, and drove downtown to First National Bank, where Edward and I had maintained our accounts for over 40 years. Mrs. Blackwell, Jenny Morrison, the branch manager, greeted me warmly. She'd been one of my students 20 years ago, a shy girl who'd blossomed into a confident professional. "How wonderful to see you! How can we help you today?" "I'd like comprehensive statements for all my accounts going back 24 months, please." Jenny smiled slightly. "Of course. Is everything all right? You're not having any problems with fraudulent charges or anything like that, are you?" "No," I said, with the practiced smile I'd perfected during 3 decades of dealing with concerned parents and skeptical administrators. "Just doing some financial planning." Back home, I spread the statements across my dining room table. The same table where Melody had laughed about my gullibility just 12 hours earlier. I put on my reading glasses and began the methodical work of adding up every check I'd written to my daughter, every transfer I'd made to her account. What I discovered made me physically nauseous. In 24 months, I'd given Melody $156,000. I sat back in my chair, staring at the number I'd written on my notepad in red ink. $156,000. More than double my annual retirement income. Money I'd earned through decades of early mornings, difficult teenagers, concerned parents, budget meetings, and staying late to help struggling students prepare for college entrance exams. I walked through my house with new eyes, suddenly noticing things I'd been ignoring for months. The living room carpet was worn thin in several places, with frayed edges where Edward used to pace while watching football games. The kitchen faucet had been dripping for 6 months, leaving rust stains in the sink. The front porch steps sagged noticeably, and I'd been putting off calling a contractor because of the estimated $4,000 repair cost.
The upstairs bathroom shower leaked behind the wall, creating a water stain on the kitchen ceiling below that grew larger each month. The furnace made concerning noises every time it started up, and the HVAC technician had warned me last spring that it would need to be replaced soon, a $6,000 expense I'd been dreading. I'd been living like a woman who needed to count every penny while handing my daughter enough money to buy a luxury car or put a down payment on a house. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done since Edward's death. I called my sister Ruth in Phoenix. Ruth had always been the practical one in our family, the sister who asked hard questions and demanded honest answers. If anyone could help me make sense of this situation, it would be Ruth. "Dorothy!" Ruth's voice was warm with genuine pleasure. "What a wonderful surprise! I was just thinking about you yesterday. How are you holding up, sweetheart?" "I'm fine, Ruthie. Well, actually, I'm not fine. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, even if it's not what I want to hear." "You know I'm always honest with you, sometimes more than you'd like. What's troubling you?" I told her everything. The dinner party conversation, Melody's casual cruelty, the devastating bank statement totals. Ruth listened without interrupting, making only small sounds of sympathy and growing outrage. $156,000, she repeated slowly when I finished. "In 2 years." "That's correct." "And she called you an ATM? To her friends?
In your own house?" Those were her exact words. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried the authority she'd developed during 40 years as a surgical nurse. "Dorothy, honey, I'm going to say something you absolutely don't want to hear, but it needs to be said. That girl has been systematically taking advantage of your grief and loneliness, and she's gotten so comfortable with it that she's bragging about her manipulation techniques to her friends." "But Ruth, she's building a business. Divorces are expensive and complicated. She's been through so much trauma." "Stop." Ruth's voice cut through my excuses like a scalpel. "Listen to yourself right now. You're making excuses for someone who just told a room full of people that you're too pathetic and lonely to see through her lies." The words hit me like cold water. I sank into Edward's chair, clutching the phone. "Dorothy, think about this rationally. You were a school administrator for 30 years. You dealt with manipulative teenagers and their enabling parents every day. If one of those parents had come to you and told you this exact story about their child, what would you have told them?" I closed my eyes, knowing she was right. I would have told them their child was exhibiting classic manipulation behaviors and that continuing to reward those behaviors would only make them worse. "What do I do, Ruth? She's my only child. After Edward died, she's all the family I have left." "No, sweetie. You have me and your friends from school and half the kids you taught who still send you Christmas cards. Melody isn't your only family. She's just convinced you that she is, so you'll be too afraid of losing her to say no." After I hung up with Ruth, I sat in my garden as the October afternoon light faded to gold. Edward had planted the rose bushes along the back fence during our 3rd year in the house, and I'd maintained them faithfully for the 6 years since his death. They needed constant care, pruning, fertilizing, protection from pests and disease, but the reward was worth the effort. Months of beautiful blooms that filled the yard with fragrance and color. Relationships, I'd always believed, were like those roses. They required patience, attention, and unconditional love to flourish. But some relationships I was beginning to understand were more parasitic than symbiotic. Some people took everything you offered and still demanded more, giving nothing back except the promise that maybe, if you were very good and very generous, they might continue to allow you the privilege of their presence. My phone rang at 7:45 p.m. just as I was finishing a solitary dinner of leftover bourguignon that tasted like ashes in my mouth. Melody's name appeared on the screen, along with her smiling photo from last Christmas. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice bright with artificial cheer. "I just wanted to thank you again for last night. Everyone is still absolutely raving about your cooking. Vivian asked me 3 times for your bourguignon recipe." "I'm glad they enjoyed it," I managed. "Listen, I hate to bother you with this, but I'm in a really terrible bind. The boutique's air conditioning system completely failed this morning, and the repair company says the whole unit needs to be replaced. They're quoting me $6,500, which is absolutely ridiculous. But with the fall shopping season just starting, I simply cannot lose customers because the store is uncomfortable." She paused, waiting for the response she'd heard dozens of times before. "Of course, darling. Whatever you need, I'll write you a check tonight and drop it off tomorrow." Instead, I said, "That does sound expensive. Have you gotten estimates from other companies?" The silence that followed was so profound I could hear my grandmother's antique clock ticking in the hallway. "Other estimates," she repeated, as if I'd suggested something completely unreasonable. "Mom, this is an emergency. I need to get this fixed immediately, or I could lose thousands of dollars in sales." "I understand it's urgent, sweetheart, but $6,500 is quite a lot of money. It seems prudent to shop around a bit, don't you think?" "But, Mom, you always—" She stopped herself abruptly, and I could practically hear her recalibrating her approach. "I mean, yes, I suppose I could call a few more places tomorrow, but what if I lose customers while I'm waiting for estimates? 1 or 2 days of research could potentially save you thousands of dollars. That seems like a wise investment of time." After she hung up, with considerably less warmth than usual, I sat in Edward's chair and opened our old photo albums. Page after page of Melody's childhood. Birthday parties where she was always the center of attention, Christmas mornings where she demanded to open every present first, school plays where she somehow always landed the starring role. There were pictures from her college graduation, her wedding day, family vacations where she'd pouted if we didn't do exactly what she wanted, and more recent photos from holidays and birthdays where her smile looked increasingly practiced, her affection increasingly conditional. I thought about patterns I'd been too loving or too blind to see. How she'd always been able to charm her way out of consequences for poor choices. How she'd convinced Edward to buy her a car for her 16th birthday by alternating between tears and silence until he gave in. How she'd talked us into paying for a master's degree program she'd abandoned after one semester, claiming the coursework wasn't intellectually stimulating enough. How she'd always known exactly what emotional buttons to push to get exactly what she wanted. The next morning, I called Riverside Financial Planning and made an appointment with Martin Thornfield, the advisor Edward and I had consulted before his retirement. I brought copies of all my bank statements, every check to Melody highlighted in yellow marker like evidence in a criminal case. "Mrs. Blackwell," he said gently, adjusting his reading glasses as he reviewed the numbers, "I have to say, I'm quite concerned about your current spending patterns." The evidence was spread across his mahogany desk like an indictment. 24 months of financial generosity that looked increasingly foolish in the stark light of his office. "At this rate of expenditure," he continued carefully, "you'll exhaust your liquid savings within 18 months. Your retirement accounts would last perhaps 3 years after that, assuming no major medical expenses or home repairs." The words hit me like a physical blow. 3 years. At 73, I could easily live another 15 or 20 years, assuming reasonable health. I'd been on track to fund perhaps 5 of those years. What if I were to reduce my monthly assistance to my daughter? I asked, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "If you eliminated it entirely and returned to your pre-2022 spending patterns, your current savings would comfortably last into your mid-90s, assuming reasonable inflation and healthcare costs." That evening, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I was going to discover exactly what Melody had been doing with my money. I was going to find out whether the boutique even existed, whether her emergencies were real, whether any of the love and gratitude she'd expressed over the past 2 years had been genuine. And depending on what I discovered, I was going to decide whether the daughter I thought I'd raised had ever really existed, or whether I'd been funding an elaborate performance for years, starring in my own tragedy as the lonely old woman too grateful for scraps of attention to notice she was being systematically robbed. I thought about something Edward used to say when we dealt with particularly challenging students. The cruelest thing you can do to someone is enable their worst impulses. Sometimes the most loving response is the one that feels meanest in the moment. At the time, I thought he was talking about teenagers who needed structure and consequences to learn responsibility. Now, I realized he'd been preparing me for a much more personal and painful lesson. Because if there's one thing 35 years in education teaches you, it's that people will generally live up or down to your expectations. And when someone starts taking your love for granted, treating your generosity as an entitlement rather than a gift, you have 2 choices. Continue enabling the behavior and watch it escalate, or find the courage to demand better. I'd spent 2 years choosing enablement. Starting tomorrow, I was going to choose courage.
And if that meant discovering uncomfortable truths about the daughter I'd sacrificed my financial security for, so be it. Because sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones taking the biggest advantage of your affection. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone, and for yourself, is to stop rewarding behavior that diminishes you both. I was about to find out which kind of love my daughter deserved.
She displayed a portfolio management screen showing dozens of investment holdings across multiple sectors. We also hold significant equity positions in 17 major airlines operating out of Denver International, including a 23% stake in Rocky Mountain Airways, the parent company of the airline operating Flight 847. The implication hit Captain Harrison like a physical blow. Not only had he discriminated against someone who owned part of the airport, but she was also a major shareholder in his own airline. Marcus Chen's live stream audience had grown to 2,156 viewers, and aviation industry professionals were flooding the comments. Blackwood Aviation is huge in the industry. They basically control half the airports in the Mountain West. This pilot has no idea how much trouble he's in. Screenshot the stock holdings. Robert Martinez, still recording his TikTok video, provided hushed commentary. Folks, we're witnessing what might be the most expensive discrimination incident in aviation history. This woman doesn't just have money, she has institutional power. The incident was now spreading across multiple platforms simultaneously. Jessica Williams, the college student who had started documenting on Snapchat, had switched to TikTok and was providing real-time updates to her 3,400 followers. Her video had been shared 47 times in the past 10 minutes. Update: she literally owns part of the airport and the airline. The pilot is still trying to argue with her. This is insane, she narrated quietly. Lisa Park, the attorney who had been taking notes, began posting detailed analysis on LinkedIn. Currently witnessing potential civil rights violation at DEN. Airline captain challenged black woman's first-class boarding pass based on passenger profiling. Plot twist: she's the CEO of the company that owns the airport. Legal implications are staggering. Her professional network began sharing and commenting immediately, bringing employment lawyers, civil rights attorneys, and aviation industry executives into the expanding digital documentation of the incident. The elderly couple, Harold and Margaret Thompson, who had been silent observers, finally spoke up. Harold approached Dr. Blackwood with obvious embarrassment. "Ma'am, I want to apologize for not speaking up earlier. What happened here was wrong from the beginning, and we should have said something." Dr. Blackwood nodded graciously. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate that acknowledgement. This situation illustrates why it's important for witnesses to speak up when they see discriminatory treatment." As the true scope of Dr. Blackwood's authority became clear, the operational implications began cascading through Denver International Airport's management structure. Sarah Rodriguez received an urgent message on her terminal from the Airport Operations Center. "Gate C32, please provide immediate status update on the Blackwood situation. Multiple department heads are requesting information." The message had been sent by Airport Operations Director Michael Chen, no relation to the live streamer, who had been monitoring the situation through security camera feeds and social media reports. Within minutes, he was walking rapidly toward Gate C32, his radio crackling with updates from various department supervisors. "Dr. Blackwood?" he said as he approached, slightly out of breath from his hurried walk across the terminal. "I'm Michael Chen, Operations Director. On behalf of Denver International Airport, I want to personally apologize for this incident." The arrival of airport senior management caused another ripple of attention through the gate area. Passengers realized they were witnessing something far beyond a routine boarding dispute. Dr. Blackwood stood to greet Director Chen, and for the first time since the incident began, she smiled genuinely. "Michael, thank you for coming personally.
This situation has provided an excellent real-time case study of how unconscious bias can manifest in operational settings. Dr. Blackwood's tablet chimed with an incoming call from someone listed as Rocky Mountain Airways CEO emergency line. She answered immediately, putting the call on speaker for everyone to hear. Dr. Blackwood, this is CEO Patricia Williams from Rocky Mountain Airways. We've been monitoring the situation at Gate C32, and I want to personally apologize for our employees' conduct. Captain Harrison's face went completely white as he realized his airline's chief executive was calling to apologize to the woman he had been challenging. Patricia, Dr. Blackwood replied calmly, I appreciate your prompt response. This incident has been documented across multiple social media platforms and is currently being viewed by over 3,000 people in real time. I think we need to discuss immediate corrective actions. CEO Williams' voice was tight with controlled panic. Dr. Blackwood, whatever corrective actions you deem appropriate, we'll implement immediately. Captain Harrison's conduct does not represent our company values. The public nature of the CEO's apology and immediate willingness to take corrective action made it clear to everyone listening that Dr. Blackwood wielded significant influence in the aviation industry. With airport operations management, airline executives, and hundreds of digital witnesses now engaged, Dr. Blackwood began addressing the broader implications of what had occurred.
Mrs. Blackwell, your daughter has never operated a business called Elegance and Grace, or any other business. There are no business licenses, no tax filings, no commercial insurance policies in her name. I nodded, having expected this confirmation. However, she has been very busy with your money. I traced the deposits you made to her account, and I can tell you exactly where that $156,000 went. She spread out bank statements, credit card records, and receipts across her desk like evidence in a court case. $43,000 went to a gambling addiction, online poker sites, sports betting apps, casino withdrawals. The amount started small 2 years ago, but escalated dramatically over the past 6 months. My stomach dropped. Gambling? Another $62,000 went to maintaining a lifestyle she couldn't afford. Designer clothes, expensive restaurants, luxury vacations. This spa weekend in Scottsdale she mentioned, it was actually a week-long gambling retreat in Las Vegas that cost $8,000. Ruth's hand tightened on mine. The remaining $51,000 appears to have gone towards supporting her boyfriend. Boyfriend? The word came out as a whisper. But she's married to Marcus. He's deployed overseas. Rebecca's expression was gentle but firm. Mrs. Blackwell, your daughter has divorced Marcus 18 months ago. The boyfriend's name is Trevor Caldwell. He's 48, unemployed, and has a criminal record for financial fraud. The room tilted. Divorced? But she still wears her wedding ring. She talks about Marcus like he's coming home soon. I have copies of the divorce decree. It was finalized in April of last year. She's been living with this Trevor person in a rented house on the expensive side of town. The rent alone is $4,500 per month. Ruth made a sound of disgust. That manipulative little witch. There's more, Rebecca continued. Trevor Caldwell was arrested 3 weeks ago for running an investment scam. He's currently out on bail, awaiting trial. According to my sources, he convinced several elderly victims to invest their retirement savings in a fake cryptocurrency scheme. I felt physically sick. My money went to support a criminal? It appears so. I have photographs of them together at expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, shopping trips. Your generosity has been funding their entire lifestyle, while she lied to you about being a struggling single mother and business owner. Rebecca handed me a photograph. Melody and a man I'd never seen before, both dressed expensively, toasting with champagne at what looked like a high-end restaurant. Melody's smile was radiant, genuine in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in years. "Mrs. Blackwell, there's something else. I found evidence that your daughter has been researching your assets. She has copies of your will, your insurance policies, and property records for your house. She's been planning for your death." The words hit me like a physical blow. Ruth's arm went around my shoulders as I struggled to breathe. "Planning how?" "She's taken out a life insurance policy on you without your knowledge, which is illegal, by the way. She's also been in contact with real estate agents about the potential sale value of your house." I stared at the evidence spread across Rebecca's desk: bank statements, photographs, legal documents. The paper trail of a daughter who had systematically betrayed every aspect of our relationship. "What should I do?" I asked finally. "Legally, you have several options. The fraudulent life insurance policy is a crime. If you can prove you were deceived about the purpose of the money transfers, you might have grounds for a lawsuit. But, Mrs. Blackwell, I have to ask, what do you want to happen here?" I thought about that question all the way home. The confrontation. That evening I sat in my garden with Ruth, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The roses Edward had planted were dormant now, preparing for winter, but the structure of the garden remained beautiful even in its seasonal death. "What are you going to do, Dorothy?" Ruth asked gently. "I'm going to give her one chance to tell me the truth. And if she doesn't, then I'm going to show her that this ATM is permanently out of order." I called Melody and asked her to come over for dinner the next evening. "Just the two of us," I said. "I wanted to discuss some important family matters." She arrived looking nervous, clutching a bottle of expensive wine like a peace offering. She'd dressed carefully, a conservative dress, minimal makeup, her hair pulled back in a style that made her look younger and more vulnerable. "Mom, you sounded serious on the phone. Is everything okay? You're not having health problems, are you?" We sat in the living room, the same room where she'd hugged me and called me wonderful just days ago. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and tried to find traces of the little girl who used to help me bake cookies and pick flowers for the kitchen table. "Melody, I want to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer them honestly. Can you do that for me?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Of course, Mom. You can ask me anything." "Where is your boutique located?" The color drained from her face. What do you mean?" "It's a simple question. What's the address of Elegance and Grace?" "Mom, I told you we moved." "There is no boutique, Melody. There never was. I've checked every street in the Arts District. I've spoken to other business owners. Your boutique doesn't exist." She stared at me for a long moment, and I watched her calculate her response. Finally, she laughed, that same musical sound that had once charmed teachers and boyfriends. "Okay, you caught me. I haven't actually opened the boutique yet. The startup costs were higher than expected, and I've been working on securing better financing. I didn't want to disappoint you by admitting the delays."
So what have you been doing with the $156,000 I've given you over the past 2 years? The number hung in the air between us like an accusation. Melody's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. That can't be right. It hasn't been that much. I have bank statements, Melody. Every check, every transfer, all documented. $156,000. She began to cry then, tears that looked real enough but felt performed. "Mom, I'm so sorry. You're right, I should have been more careful with the money, but everything's been so hard since the divorce." "What divorce, Melody?" Another long pause.
You know about Marcus. I know you divorced him 18 months ago. I know you've been living with someone named Trevor Caldwell. I know Trevor was arrested for fraud 3 weeks ago." Her mask finally slipped completely. The tears stopped, and her face hardened into an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, almost cruel. "How much do you know?" "I know about the gambling. I know about the expensive lifestyle you've been funding with my retirement money. I know about the illegal life insurance policy you took out on me." Melody stood up, pacing to the window and back. When she turned to face me, she looked like a stranger. "You hired someone to investigate me? Your own daughter?" "My own daughter has been lying to me for 2 years and stealing my life savings." "Stealing?" Her voice rose. "It's not stealing when you give it freely. You wanted to help me, remember? You wanted to feel useful and needed." The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. "So you decided to take advantage of that?" "I decided to let you help me the way you wanted to help, and it worked out perfectly until you started getting suspicious and nosy." I looked at this woman, my daughter, my only child, and realized I was seeing her clearly for the first time in years, perhaps in her entire life. "The money stops now, Melody." She laughed, but there was no music in it anymore. "Oh, does it? And what exactly are you going to do with your money, Mom? You're 73 years old. You barely leave this house except for groceries and doctor's appointments. At least when I spend your money, someone young enough to enjoy it benefits. I'm going to live my life with dignity and security, something you've been trying to take away from me." "Dignity?" She looked around the living room with obvious contempt. "You call this living? Sitting alone in this old house, talking to pictures of Dad, acting grateful when your only child bothers to visit? You should be thanking me for giving your money some purpose." The words were designed to hurt, and they did, but they also clarified something important. "Get out of my house, Melody." "What?" "Get out. And don't come back unless you're prepared to apologize sincerely and begin paying back what you've stolen." "You can't be serious. I'm your daughter, your only family." "My family wouldn't steal from me. My family wouldn't lie to me for years. My family wouldn't take out life insurance policies hoping I die soon." She stared at me for a moment, and I saw her realize that her usual manipulations weren't going to work this time. "You'll regret this, Mom. When you're sitting here alone for Christmas, for your birthday, when you have medical emergencies and no one to help you, you'll remember that you chose money over your own daughter. I chose self-respect over being exploited. There's a difference." After she left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, I sat in Edward's chair and cried. Not for the money. Money could be replaced or adjusted for. I cried for the daughter I thought I'd raised, who, apparently, had never existed. I cried for the years of love and support I'd given to someone who saw me as nothing more than a convenient source of funding. But I also felt something unexpected: relief. New beginnings. The next morning, I called my bank and placed fraud alerts on all my accounts. I changed my will, removing Melody as executor and beneficiary. I called Rebecca Torres and authorized her to file complaints about the illegal life insurance policy she took out. Ruth stayed with me for a week, helping me process everything that had happened and plan for the future. "You know what, Dorothy?" she said one morning over coffee. "That girl did you a favor." "How do you figure?" "She showed you exactly who she is before you gave her everything you had. Some people don't figure out their children are parasites until they're in nursing homes, completely broke and abandoned." That afternoon, we drove to a travel agency. With the money I was no longer giving to Melody, I could afford to take the trips Edward and I had always planned but never taken. Scotland, to see the castles and countryside my grandmother had described in her letters. Italy, to walk through the art galleries and ancient ruins I'd shown my students in textbooks for decades. "You're really going to do this?" Ruth asked as I signed up for a 3-week European tour departing in the spring. "I'm 73 years old. If not now, when?" I also enrolled in audit classes at the community college: art history, creative writing, conversational Spanish. I joined a book club at the library and volunteered to tutor literacy students at the community center. For the first time since Edward's death, I was building a life that belonged to me, funded by money I'd earned and saved, surrounded by people who valued my company rather than my bank account.
Mom, Trevor left me. He said I was bad luck after you cut off the money. I'm having some problems. The rent is due, and I don't have anywhere else to turn. Could we maybe talk? I saved the message, but didn't return the call. 2 weeks later, Rebecca Torres called with an update. "Mrs. Blackwell, I thought you should know. Trevor Caldwell pled guilty to the fraud charges. He'll be sentenced next month, probably 3 to 5 years in federal prison. And your daughter's house was foreclosed on last week. She's been forced to move in with one of her friends." "How do you feel about that?" Ruth asked when I told her. I thought about it carefully. "I feel sad for the child I raised, but I don't feel responsible for the adult she chose to become. The truth was, I slept better at night knowing my money was in my accounts, earning interest, providing security from my future, rather than funding someone else's irresponsible choices. I enjoyed my morning coffee more when I didn't have to worry about the next crisis call, the next emergency that would cost me thousands of dollars. I was learning to live without the constant anxiety of being someone else's solution to every problem." 6 months later. Spring came early to Riverside, and my garden bloomed more beautifully than it had in years, perhaps because I finally had time and energy to tend it properly, not being constantly drained by financial and emotional emergencies. I was pruning the roses when my neighbor, Helen Morrison, stopped by with her 7-year-old granddaughter. "Mrs. Blackwell, would you mind if Katie picked a few flowers for her mother? She's been admiring your garden from our yard." "Of course," I said, handing Katie my good scissors. "Choose whichever ones speak to you." As Katie carefully selected blooms, Helen lingered by the fence. "You seem different lately, happier, more present." "I've made some changes in my life. Difficult ones, but necessary." "Good for you. It's never too late to put yourself first." That evening, I called Ruth to tell her about my upcoming trip to Scotland and the A in Spanish conversation I'd earned at the community college. "I'm proud of you," she said. "You chose a difficult path, but you chose yourself. That takes courage." Some days I wonder if I was too harsh with Melody. "Dorothy, listen to me. You gave that girl every advantage, every opportunity to be honest with you. She chose to lie, steal, and manipulate instead. Her consequences are the result of her choices, not yours." A year after the confrontation, I received a letter from Melody. It was postmarked from a women's shelter downtown. "Mom, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I've been in therapy and my counselor suggested I write to apologize for my behavior. I was wrong to take advantage of your generosity and trust. I was wrong to lie about the boutique and about Trevor. I was especially wrong to speak about you the way I did to my friends. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for money. I'm working 2 part-time jobs and trying to get my life together. I wanted you to know that I understand now how badly I hurt you, and I'm sorry. If you're ever willing to have coffee sometime, just to talk, I would like that. But I understand if you're not ready for that, or if you never want to see me again. I hope you're taking care of yourself and doing things that make you happy. Love, Melody." I read the letter 3 times, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden requests for money. It seemed genuine, but I'd been fooled before. I put the letter in my desk drawer and didn't respond immediately.
2 weeks later, I called the women's shelter and asked to speak with Melody's counselor, a woman named Sarah Chen. Mrs. Blackwell, I can't discuss specific details about your daughter's case, but I can tell you that she's been in our program for 4 months now. She's working hard on understanding how her gambling addiction and relationship choices led to destructive behaviors. Do you think she's genuinely changed? Recovery is a process, Mrs. Blackwell. She's taking the right steps, but change takes time. The fact that she wrote to you without asking for anything suggests genuine progress. I thanked Sarah and hung up, still uncertain. That night, I looked through the photo albums again, not with grief this time, but with the kind of analytical eye that I'd use to evaluate students, looking for patterns, for signs I'd missed, for evidence of who Melody really was beneath the performances. I found pictures that told a different story than the one I'd been telling myself. Melody at 16 pouting because we'd said no to an expensive car. Melody at 22 angry because we wouldn't fund a spring break trip to Europe. Melody at 30 sulking when Edward suggested she contribute to family dinners instead of always being the guest. But I also found gentler moments. Melody at 8 carefully bandaging a bird's broken wing. Melody at 14, crying when our elderly dog died. Melody at 25, helping me care for Edward during his first heart attack. The capacity for both kindness and selfishness had always been there. The question was which version would ultimately define her. 3 months later, I agreed to meet Melody for coffee at a neutral location, the small cafe near the community college where I took my Spanish classes. She looked older, thinner, with lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a sweater that had clearly been purchased secondhand rather than from a designer boutique. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly.
We talked for an hour. She told me about the gambling addiction she was working to overcome, about the therapy sessions where she was learning to recognize her manipulative behaviors, about the part-time jobs she was working to rebuild her independence. She didn't ask for money. She didn't make excuses. She apologized again, more specifically this time, acknowledging the specific lies and betrayals. "I don't expect you to trust me again right away," she said as we prepared to leave. "I know I have to earn that back, if it's even possible." "It's possible," I said carefully, "but it will take time, and it will require you to prove through actions, not words, that you've changed." We agreed to meet again in a month. That meeting led to another and another. Slowly, carefully, we began rebuilding something that resembled a relationship. Not the old dynamic where I gave and she took, but something more balanced and honest. She never moved back into my house. She never again had access to my bank accounts. But over time, we developed a friendship based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. On my 75th birthday, she gave me a gift that probably cost less than $20, a small succulent plant in a hand-painted pot she'd made in a community art class. "I know it's not much," she said. "It's perfect," I replied, and meant it. Because sometimes the smallest gifts mean the most when they're given freely, without expectation or manipulation, by someone who's finally learned the difference between love and exploitation. I kept the plant on my kitchen windowsill, where it thrived in the morning sun. A small, living reminder that growth is possible, even after the harshest winters, even when you think everything beautiful has died. The day I overheard Melody call me an ATM was the day I learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you most are simply the best at knowing which buttons to push. But it was also the day I learned that it's never too late to demand better, from others and from yourself. My name is Dorothy Blackwell, and at 75, I finally learned to put myself first. It was the hardest lesson of my life and the most necessary one. Because sometimes love means saying no, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst impulses, even when that someone is your own child.
The ATM was permanently closed, but the woman who'd been hiding behind it was finally free to live her own life.